Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babiar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. Once again, I'm joined today by DeNail Sparks in our series we're doing on outliers in support raising. If you missed the podcast from last week, go ahead and just pause this one. Go back and listen to episode 1 because I think it does a great job of setting up what it is we're actually talking about here when it comes to having outliers, moments and change of directions and things that tend to, I don't want to say go wrong, but go differently when you're in a support raising meeting. So DeNail, my friend, welcome again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Aaron. My pleasure. And
as people are continuing to get to know you, just share briefly. I know you were a college athlete. Give us a little bit of perspective on
that. I was a college athlete. What I consider myself is a geek that once played football.
There you go.
I played football at the University of Southern California. Loved every minute of it, but graduated. And the thing that changed my life there was I heard the gospel as a freshman in college for the very first time. Responded to the gospel, told my friends about the gospel, became a chaplain to the team, the basketball team, and served with the football team. Started a couple of ministries with a good friend of mine. Traveled up and down the West Coast, sharing what I learned as an athlete. Even while I was a student, we started a ministry and just traveled to the West Coast and around the country preaching the gospel. And I said, look, I don't want to stop. So I told my parents I wanted to be a full-time minister. They swore I was crazy.
Of course.
I am, which is, I think you have to be a little crazy to become a minister, but crazy for God, crazy for what he does, crazy for how he changes lives.
Yeah.
Looking in the eye of somebody who didn't know the Lord, and then half an hour later or an hour later or a year or two later, looking in their eyes once again and seeing that there's something happening in their soul that God is doing and you were a part of it. That's just an amazing moment. It really is. And so I love that. And I've been doing it now for a number of years, and now I train others to do the same.
Yes.
And I'm privileged and honored to now work with a ministry that has a deep passion not only to win the campus, but to win the lost on those campuses, train them for leadership, and then deploy them to the nations.
Awesome.
So again and again and again, reproduce ourselves. So very excited about that.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, obviously, we're talking about outliers. And within outliers, there can be a lot of different things that go different in a support raising meeting. For the sake of this second episode, let's at least initially, let's zoom in on what happens when all of a sudden there's a time crunch, and your understanding of how much time you have or don't have can really change.
Sure.
A couple of examples might be you get there and the person says, "Hey, I got 10 minutes." Wow. I've had that happen to me. Or the flip side of they come over to your house, you start talking, you have a long conversation, and they keep asking questions, and all of a sudden you realize, man, I'm going to be 2 hours into this. Like, do I have to fill the whole time with conversation? So that whole time thing, I know that for people that have been through a Support Raising Solutions boot camp, we train some, to have more of a conversation than a presentation.
Yes.
And we even make some suggestions for how much time we suggest you have. But honestly, we're usually thinking through the context of you're probably meeting somebody publicly. You're probably meeting in a coffee shop. But then, as you well know, DeNail, things can change rather quickly. People can show up late. They have a limited amount of time, any number of things. So I'm just going to start by kicking it to you and say, what have you learned or what do you train when you realize all of a sudden time has become a bit squishy? It's changed on the fly.
Sure. Well, I like this topic because, it's funny because you're taught one thing and then slowly you learn there's a nuance to that one thing. It's like my daughter. She's 17 years old. One day she's going to get married. As far as she's concerned, it's walking up an altar and saying, "I do" with a guy you had a crush on. And I said, no, that's not marriage. That's the ceremony that tells the public you're getting married, but
Right.
that's not marriage.
Right.
Marriage is full of so many other things, and I think the same way about partnership development. Going through a training, which is essential, it lasts a week or so,
Mm-hmm.
but the lifestyle is exactly that. It lasts a lifetime. There's nuances
Yes.
you learn along the way that make you more successful than as you apply what you learned from the training for years. But one of those things that we talk about in the training, and then we bring out the nuances, are those meetings where you're meeting with somebody who's extremely busy. It was a miracle you got the meeting in the first place, but you didn't know that.
Seriously. Yeah.
Or it is a meeting with unforeseen issues. A young mother that says, hey, my child just had an emergency. I just got off the phone with them. I've got to go, but you've got 10 minutes.
Yes. Yes.
I did this with another father. His son had a game, and he just remembered it at the last second and says, look, I don't want to cancel our meeting. But he shook hands with me and go sit down and ready, go. And so there was no rapport, no getting to know him at all.
Right.
So something that I do is, one, I tell people, don't panic. God still set up the meeting. You need to take full advantage of it, but you need to understand that if you're there to ask the question and present your ministry, go ahead and do that without rushing. And so instead of sharing the full paragraphs and the full presentation, so to speak, in the conversation, you know what, you might have to boil down everything you say into one sentence or one question at a time. And so one point with it is, a friend of mine calls them elevator speeches. If I press on the first floor, can I finish what I'm going to say by the time we get to the fifth floor? If you can't do that, with it stopping on each floor, then you need to practice that. So first of all, one, they're going to happen. You need to practice for it.
That's a good way to put it. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, isn't it?
It's going to happen. And in order to make the most of the opportunity, you have to be ready. And so practice sharing your presentation within 5 minutes. Practice sharing what you have to say within 5 minutes. And so we teach people how to boil it down. One sentence of testimony. Hey, I heard the gospel for the first time as a college student, and it changed my life forever. All right, what's your goal? My goal is to do and share with others what was done and shared with me. Will you help me? This is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people who will prayerfully, financially back me up. And here's what I need from you specifically. Here's what I'm asking of you specifically. Now, obviously, there's a little bit more in between that, because that's like 2 minutes. That's less than a minute, actually. But there are stories. And here's something else that helps me. I have pictures. Pictures literally are, in this scenario, worth 1,000 words. Depending upon who I'm meeting with, I'm already thinking of 2 scenarios.
Okay.
One, if it goes the way I planned it, which is, what the training helps us prepare for. Then if it goes the way I haven't planned it. Those are the 2 scenarios I'm keeping in mind, because those are really the only 2 that actually happen.
Right.
And unplanned.
Right, sure.
And so if it's going to be shortened, then I have in my back pocket a short version of my testimony, a short version of why I do what I do, maybe a check question or 2. And then here's something, and this is usually, in my opinion, the hardest part for some of the people who do this. How do I graciously interrupt? How do I graciously interject without being rude, without being abrupt, without being callous?
Right.
And so I will completely, if I have to, blame myself, but I don't mean, an actual mea culpa, but a verbal mea culpa. And something that I said, look, I understand your time is short. And so I don't want to take up your precious time to do the thing that whatever it is you need to do. And I won't say it that way, but I'll describe specifically what it is. So I want to honor that time as well as honor the resources.
Which lets them know they're being heard and respected.
That's right. And that's tremendously helpful versus just rushing through. That's something I try not to do, is rush. Don't come across as rushed. So I'm going to think through. I'm going to pause. I'm going to slow down. I'm not going to get flustered. That comes with practice.
Yes.
But it also comes with experience. So if you're experiencing that moment, as I shared before, don't panic.
And I'll say this too. So somebody's like, well, how do I practice that? Use your mirror. Like, seriously.
That's right.
Find a mirror in your house, shut yourself in that room, and make yourself give a 5-minute support raising presentation.
That's
It's
right.
never going to sound right because none of us want to have to do that. And
Right.
yet, once you can do something in 5 to 10 minutes, if you know you can, when that moment happens when you have to, you'll be able to.
That's right. Something that beyond included with that 5 minute window is sometimes I'll share it with a friend. Hey, give me 5 minutes. I won't even tell them what we're meeting about. Just give me 5 minutes. And then at the end of it, did that make sense? Did what I say make sense to you?
That's great. Getting
And
that,
if
getting
it
that
did make
feedback is
sense,
helpful.
yeah, that feedback is tremendously helpful. Along with the mirror, you can record it. Today's smartphones, they can record plenty of information. Record yourself explaining. Were you coherent? Were you concise? Were you
Yes.
clear? And it all increases your confidence when you're able to say something that you wanted to say, even if you didn't have enough time to say it.
Mm.
Um, and so when you can do that and practice it, even if it comes down to, let me keep this recording on my phone so that just in the downtime, I can listen to myself, since it only will take 5 to 10 minutes. Does what I say make sense? And the more you practice that, the easier it's going to be, the less flustered you'll be when the moment comes.
Good.
And then go from there. There is a scenario that's a little bit different where you are in the middle of what you're saying. You didn't know you had 5 minutes halfway through.
Right.
Suddenly halfway through, they said, okay, we've got to end this. You've got 5 minutes.
And they might not even
So,
say it. You might have to pick up on verbal cues. They might like continue to look at their phone or their watch, or maybe
right,
it's a look of concern hits their face.
right.
Like sometimes
That's
they're
right.
nonverbal cues.
That's right. And there's multiple ways you can go with this. I'll name two. One, you can go to the point of your conversation so that, especially if you're already around the horn, you've been 45 minutes with them, but you expected a whole hour, or you're 30 minutes with them and you expected 45, whatever you have to cut short. You can summarize what you wanted to say and pop the question. Or depending upon what you think their ease of access is. Now that's hard to gauge.
Mm-hmm.
But for certain people, there's people that we meet with who, whenever we want to meet, they want to meet.
Right.
But if it's somebody like that, then you can say, you know what, I would love to continue this conversation with you. If you haven't gotten so far where they're at the edge of their seat waiting to hear why you came, it might be good just to reschedule and say, I'd love to keep this conversation going. How about we meet at not a month later, but tomorrow, the next day, etc. Maybe you can continue the conversation. So, but if you're in a scenario where you have to share the whole thing, you have to pop the question, then the practice that you put into it will pay off because you can summarize what you're going to say. And then I'll end with this point. For most of us, we don't, uh, we have materials in front of us. We have a presentation folder, a PowerPoint, a keynote, something that they're saying. Uh, because this is going to happen, meaning a short meeting, sometimes it's good to have a highlighted line per page regarding what you're sharing. So that way you don't have to go through every point, but maybe per page there's a highlighted line. That's what you focus on. And then this is what I was sharing just a moment ago. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, especially when
Yes.
you have a lot to say.
Yes.
And sometimes instead of explaining the testimony, you could point to the picture and say, this is what God does. This is Lindsay. This is her getting baptized. There's a great story behind that I'll tell you later. But this is an example of what God's doing in our ministry. What God's
That's a
doing on
great
our
idea.
campus. And so those pictures will speak more words to them than you could possibly fit in that moment.
Mm.
That's why pictures themselves are powerful when you're sharing your ministry.
Yeah.
So something that I do, I have my quote unquote presentation, but most of the time I also have a bunch of pictures on my phone in a specific order. And I can just quickly go through them when we have only minutes to spare, and it gives them a visual that speaks to them regarding the effectiveness or the importance of our ministry. And then I'll wrap it up with, again, a very specific question regarding the kind of partnership I'm looking
Yeah.
for.
Yeah. Man, that's great. That's gold. And by the way, I'll just tell on myself because I've done a lot of things that weren't so great, and every now and then I've done something. I was like, oh hey, that was a good idea. Early on, I really struggled to have that order in my mind. It was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
what do I do if I get there and they don't have as much time? Because I
Right.
unfortunately experienced this really early, and so it kind of freaked me out in a good way. Of I need to be ready. I need to be ready to know what it is I'm talking about. I need to kind of drive the conversation a bit more. And I honestly, I didn't want to have note cards. So I would have 3 or 4 of those short bullet points and I'd write them on the palm of my hand
That's right.
just so
That's
that I could
right.
take a peek and stay on track and be, learn to do things in a timely order. Because when I didn't have that, oh, DeNail, I've shared this story before on the podcast. I couldn't get out of a support raising meeting in less than like an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes. And that was with me doing all the talking. So
Mm-hmm.
I had to refine to get down to the point where I could do something in 5 to 10 minutes if I really needed to.
Right. That's right. And that comes with practice.
I want to interrupt this podcast for a brief heads up. This is Steve Shadrack, author of The God Ask. Support Raising Solutions is running a contest to win an SRS swag pack. Go check out our past podcast episode, number 29, to get details on how you can get involved and possibly win some fun Support Raising Solutions swag, including a $100 gift card.
I want to point out a resource that not all of our listeners have probably read. If you're eager to work hard to develop a solid, faithful support team to undergird your ministry for the long haul, you might want to pick up a copy of the book called Viewpoints. It's compiled and authored by Steve Shadrack, and this book called Viewpoints is filled with encouraging case studies and anecdotes that will encourage you in the support raising process. You can pick up Viewpoints at cmmpress.org, where you can receive a 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast.
It's interesting. Once you experience a short meeting one time and you didn't get accomplished what you wanted to get accomplished, hopefully that sparks a fire in you where you never want to get in that situation again, especially when it was a lost opportunity. And I shared at the beginning of our podcast here, many of these meetings are divine appointments.
Yes.
But sometimes they're one shot. It was a miracle you got the meeting in the first place. And being able to share your presentation or your ministry, though you're short on time, is sometimes a part of the process.
Yes.
And so some of these people, I've actually had partners on my team. I saw them once, shared my ministry, never saw them again.
Yep.
Write them, I call them, but they're so busy. They are so consumed with the things God's led them to do as business people, etc. I've never seen them again. We've talked on the phone, but I've never saw them face to face again. That highlighted to me that divine moment that we had to see each other face to face was really something God set up.
That's great. Well, speaking of time, we're almost out, but I did want to swing the other direction. And so I'm going to ask you to be real specific, and just speak to, how do you prevent yourself from being on the other side of that? Meaning you get in a meeting you can't get out of, like the people will take your entire 4 or 5 hours. Maybe they're at your house and they won't leave after dinner. Like what do you do to make sure, or what do you coach to make sure that people don't find themselves in what they thought was going to be a 30 to hour minute meeting, and hours later they're canceling other things in their life?
Well, you know what? Among the gifts of the Spirit, one of the ones that isn't mentioned that we experience quite often is the gift of gab. And there are people who have the ability to speak and talk and speak and talk and clarify and talk and speak and talk again and again and again. They have a gift to do that. And I don't have a problem with it. But one thing I mentioned, and I shared a little bit earlier, is that you have to learn how to divinely interrupt. But those come with practice, and whatever the phrase might be, whether it's a hand gesture. Sometimes I'll even hold up my hand out as if I'm offering something, or I don't want to stay, or I don't want to continue this longer than we need to. Here's something I'll even say. No matter what they'll say, I'll say, that's a great point. And that's what I'm talking about. And I'll bring it back to where I want to go in our presentation or conversation. But one of the most effective ways I found to end a meeting is by having a second meeting. And this is what I mean by that. When we talk about this in planning with our missionaries, people sometimes will take all the time you give them.
Yes.
They think they're doing you a service when really it's a disservice.
Mm-hmm.
Disservice because the next time you want to meet with them, sometimes they think, well, when DeNail's calling me and asks for an appointment. Well, the last time we met for 3 hours. So next time he asks me for an appointment, I don't know if I have 3 hours.
Sure. Yeah.
Sometimes they hesitate because they think, well, I don't have 3-hour blocks every time I meet with DeNail. And so, one, I don't want to set a precedent by having a super long meeting. But what I do is I fill up my schedule in such a way where whatever meeting I'm going to have, it has to end or I'm going to be late for my next meeting. And so I plan it in such a way where I have enough time to meet with somebody, drive or leave to my next location and meet with that next person.
Right.
At the same time, honoring the time by showing up on time.
Mm-hmm.
So I have no problem in this case where I'm the one, quote unquote, cutting the meeting short because one more testimony and one more story really won't bring depth to the relationship.
Yes. Yes.
And so I will learn how to end it. So I have a meeting at 2. I've made up in my mind, I have a meeting at 3:15, so to speak. It's going to take me half an hour to get there. I need to walk out of that meeting let's just say it by 2:30. I have to begin to wrap up. And I know it takes me about 10 minutes to wrap up. That's getting there, whatever gift process there might be, prayer requests, final prayers for each other. That'll take me about 10 or 15 minutes. So I factor that in.
Yeah. And actually, it's a good thing to say that. Sometimes you can tell a person, hey, thank you so much for meeting with me. See, oh, good. Look, it's 2:30. We're getting here right on time. I appreciate that. Hey, I want to be clear that, we don't necessarily have to take the full hour, but I do need to be in my car 6
right.
from now. Sometimes you can actually put those boundaries so that they know, oh, okay, I've been doing a lot of talking. He's not done talking. You're not going to have that conversation necessarily, but they might have their own internal dialogue after about 45 minutes
That's right.
I need to stop talking so that DeNail can finish what it is he needs to say.
That's right. And sometimes, and you don't know this sometimes, but sometimes you pick a bone of their passion. You say something they really believe in, and they just go and go and go. And other people you meet with just don't have an internal clock. They think they spoke for 2 minutes and they spoke for 20.
Yes.
And so there are times when you have to be mindful of the time yourself for the sake of the meeting, and learn how to end it and transition well. Here's something that I add on. When I meet with people, there's a rule of thumb that I try to have. I'd rather leave them wanting more of me than saying they've had enough.
Good. That's
so I err on, in my mind, cutting the meeting short.
Good.
Because I want them, when I call them again, oh, DeNail, oh yeah, we had a great conversation last time. It just wasn't long enough. Versus it was too long. Oh, it's DeNail again. So I'd rather I want them wanting more of me. I'd rather leave them wanting more of me than wishing I'd leave.
Good.
I've had enough of DeNail. And so,
good.
So I changed my barometer. Instead of just saying, I feel like I've said everything I need to say. You know what? I may not leave feeling like I said everything I need to say. And they may not have let me leave feeling like they had everything said either. I'm perfect with that. I'm fine with that.
That makes sense. By the way, a couple of things for people to keep in mind. I do understand the desire sometimes to have people over to your house and you think, hey, this is the best way to do it. It helps me control the environment and things like that. But when you have people over to your house, even though that can be wonderful for a number of reasons, it actually can limit your ability to end that meeting if you need to.
That's right.
I realize that some people are like, oh, but I really want to get to know them better and things like that. I get it. I understand that. I'm not saying never. It's just the reality is if you're going to have 50 or 60 or 70 or 120, how many ever appointments it's going to take you to raise up a team of people that are going to pray and financially partner with you, you can't have 155-hour meetings or you're going to be raising support for 5 to 6 years instead of 6 months.
Right. That's exactly right. And it's not a rule of thumb for me. but I'll tell you a little bit of my history. I have never had my partners over my house for a ministry appointment. And the reason why is I found that the more personal I am with them, the more distracting the moment is. The purpose of the meeting sometimes gets lost in the personal issues surrounding my partner. What I found is if I take them out to eat, if I take them to a restaurant, there's a automatic time frame there many times, because once the meal is over, things begin to wrap up. Now, there's some nuances there depending on who you're talking to. Do you talk while they eat? Do they talk while you eat? What if they say no before the meal even came? So it's going to be a quiet meal, but while you're talking, there's nuances there. But I try and find a neutral place, a place that's not full of distractions. Now, I don't mind meeting at their home, but as a guest, I'm sensitive to overstaying my welcome. But I found if I'm in a neutral location, we both feel the tension of we can't just stay here forever. Because people sometimes, when they make themselves at home, at your home, they really sometimes make themselves at home.
Yeah.
And so, and then that evolved in my life simply because with young kids at the time of building my team, the children were always a distraction. A diaper had to be changed.
Yeah. Wonderful, glorious. Yeah, they're fantastic distractions, but distractions nonetheless.
Yes, and they're great distractions. They're great conversation pieces. But sometimes the conversations don't lend towards the purpose of your meeting. So I learned over time I don't bring my partners to my home. Now, granted, as I'm older now, that's most likely going to change. But I found that the closer I am to the proximity of my own familiarity, the greater the distracted it is to the ministry partner, because now there's all these cues around them where they're asking me, what about this? Oh, I just saw this over here. Were you really over there? Ooh, who's this in that picture? And who's this over here? And then why'd you choose this neighborhood? They're asking all these questions sometimes that they have a lot to do with my life.
Right.
Have a lot to do with the reason why we're meeting.
Right. And the reality is you want to give a great presentation that feels like a conversation. And there is a bit of we use this term sometime in boot camps now, a social permission to talk about the money that is involved with the vision. That exists with some specificity and clarity when you meet at a coffee shop or at a restaurant, that kind of loses some of those, I guess, healthy natural boundaries. Some of those kind of go away when you're in a home. Again,
that's true.
We're not saying you cannot ever have somebody in your home. We're just saying that might be an outlier that really changes a lot of your presentation and how you go about it. So be aware and be wise.
And even bring further clarification to the point. For presentation purposes, I don't bring my partners home. For fellowship purposes, I'll bring them home.
Good. Yes, absolutely.
Presentation purposes, absolutely not.
Absolutely.
So that's me.
And I like you. So thank you. Thank you for joining me again this week. So, hey, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this second in our series of Outliers. DeNail, thank you again for joining me, my friend. Your wisdom is very much appreciated.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisedsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcasts from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.